So, how does a Jewish preacher from the first century end up as the center of a global holiday? One that involves decorated trees, massive gift giving, and even arguments over coffee cups. It's a wild story. Okay, let's dive in and really peel back the layers on this one.
Let's just start with a single number, 90%. According to Pew Research, a staggering 90% of Americans celebrate Christmas. I mean, by any measure you can think of, it's a massive cultural cornerstone.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Look at this. Even though pretty much everyone celebrates it, the number of people who see Christmas as a mostly religious holiday is actually going down. It's dropped 5 points in just the last decade. So we've got this fascinating puzzle, right? A sacred day that's being celebrated in an increasingly secular way. How on earth did we get here?
Well, to figure that out, we have to go way back. We need to deconstruct the holiday itself. And we're going to start with its most famous feature, the date.
Okay, here's the first big surprise for a lot of people. The Bible never gives a specific birth date for Jesus. Not a clue. In fact, the earliest Christians didn't even celebrate birthdays. They thought it was kind of a pagan thing to do. So if the Bible's totally silent on the date, where did December 25th come from? Well, scholars basically have two leading theories. The first one's the one you've probably heard of. It suggests that choosing the date was a pretty savvy move to piggyback on popular pagan winter festivals. Like the Roman Saturnalia, a whole week of feasting and presents, or the birthday of the sun god, Sol Invictus. But there's a second theory, the calculation hypothesis, which is completely theological. It comes from this really interesting ancient belief that great prophets died on the exact same day they were conceived. So the early Christians figured Jesus died around March 25th. So they just added 9 months, and voila, December 25th. And this just shows you this isn't some dusty academic debate. For a lot of people today, that pagan origin theory is a deeply held belief. It fuels some really passionate discussions online about the true roots of the holiday. And this whole blend of traditions goes way beyond just the date. The feasting, the Yule log, that has echoes of Old Norse midwinter festivals. And Santa Claus? Oh, he is a fantastic example of how things evolve. He starts as a 4th century Greek bishop, kind of morphs into the Dutch Sinterklaas, and then gets his modern, jolly, red-suited look from 19th century American poems and cartoons.
All right, so let's peel back all those layers of tradition for a minute and look at the man himself. Beyond the holiday, what can history actually tell us about the person, Jesus of Nazareth?
This is the big one, right? You see it debated endlessly online. But among actual, professional historians, the answer is pretty clear-cut.
See, to verify anybody from the ancient world, historians look for independent sources, people writing who weren't followers. They don't just take the religious text at face value. And for Jesus, we actually have a number of these, and a couple of them are incredibly important.
First up is the Roman historian Tacitus. Around 116 AD, he's writing about the Great Fire of Rome and mentions the Christians. And in the process, he just casually confirms that their founder, Christus, was executed by Pontius Pilate. Now, here's the kicker. Tacitus despised Christians, so the fact that he's confirming this as a hostile witness, well, for historians, that's gold. Then you've got Josephus, a 1st century Jewish historian. While one of his passages about Jesus is debated, this one is considered authentic by pretty much every scholar. He's talking about the execution of a man named James, and he just identifies him as the brother of Jesus, who is called Christ. It's so matter-of-fact, which is what makes it so believable. So when you put all of this together, these sources and others like them, you get a very clear historical consensus. A real person named Jesus existed. He was a Jewish preacher from Galilee, and he was executed by the Roman state. But, okay, how does this one man from a tiny province in the giant Roman Empire end up having such a massive, world-changing legacy? Let's take a look at that ripple effect. It starts with his ethical teachings like the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, these were revolutionary ideas about a higher moral law. Fast forward over 1,000 years, and that same idea, that even a king has to answer to a law greater than himself, that's a key principle behind something like the Magna Carta. And the whole drive for literacy and learning, which was so rooted in Christian thought, laid the foundation for many of the world's first universities, like Harvard. Now, this legacy, especially in education, is really complex. On the one hand, you had Christian missionaries who were absolute pioneers. They were founding schools, pushing for literacy, and educating women and marginalized people way before governments were doing it. But on the other hand, a lot of this was tied directly to colonialism, imposing Western norms and sometimes crushing local cultures. It's a very complicated and often painful history. And his influence didn't just stay in the West, not by a long shot. In Hinduism, for example, many thinkers have interpreted Jesus through their own lens. People like Gandhi saw him as an avatara, basically an incarnation of the divine here on earth, a great spiritual teacher for all of humanity. And you see a similar thing happening in the dialogue between Christianity and Buddhism. Scholars and monks find these amazing parallels. They see this incredible resonance between something like the Buddha's Eightfold Noble Path and the spiritual practices in Christianity that are all about transforming your inner self. All of this brings us right back to today, because this whole story of Jesus and Christmas, it's not just history locked in a book. It is a living, breathing, and often pretty contentious conversation that is still evolving. I mean, take a look at this comment from our sources. This person is arguing for a direct connection between Hinduism and Christianity, drawing these parallels between Krishna and Christ, and suggesting the story of Jesus was actually adapted from Hindu teachings. And then you see a direct response from a Christian perspective. This comment makes a very specific theological claim that salvation is exclusive to Jesus. And it just highlights the profound disagreements you see when these different worldviews come into contact. Then there's this, which brings in another vital part of the modern conversation: identity and representation. This comment challenges centuries of Western art, arguing that the historical Jesus, a man from the Middle East, would not have been white. It raises these huge, important questions about faith, race, and culture. And that brings us full circle, doesn't it? We've journeyed from a historical figure in Galilee to a global icon, from a sacred day to a worldwide commercial season. In the end, there isn't one simple answer to what it all means. So the real question is, what does this incredible, messy, evolving story mean to us right now? And what will it become tomorrow?